The idea is that you wrap try catch around the code that might fail. So you might think, great, I'm going to put my entire program into the try block, right? We put all that code here, all of that, we move that into try, because then we catch any error that might occur. And even though we don't know yet what we can do then, this sounds good. We catch any error and we'll probably be able to do something great and have our script not fail. This is not what you should do. Don't wrap your entire script into try. It's not good for performance, and it's also a very bad programming style. You want to write code that doesn't yield errors, and you can use the debugging section to find and fix logical and syntax errors. You only want to move code into try where you can't control whether it throws an error or not. As it's the case here, we can't control whether the user enters something valid or not. So in the end, we move this line in here, but since I want to be able to use chosen live thereafter, I will actually create and declare the variable before the try block like this, and then only assign a new value to it inside of the try block. So now we have that try block which tries that code, but just like that, it's not valid, it's not helpful, and it's also not valid syntax. You also need to add a catch block. So you add the catch keyword, and then you add parentheses, and in there a parameter, which you can give any name you want. Typically you name it error. This now is like a function, so you add curly braces thereafter, and inside of these curly braces, this error which was caught is available. So this is called like a function by JavaScript, and error is the error which was thrown. In this case, it's your own error object. If it's some system error, like with the network request I already mentioned, then it will be that error object which JavaScript created for you. So here, for example, we can now console log that error to have a look at it, to see what's inside. And we could now say, okay, chosen max life in this case is 100. That's our fallback logic. If this fails, and if it succeeds, by the way, of course, this will not execute. But if this fails, if we get an error here, then this will not execute successfully, but this here will. And therefore here we can now set a value with which the rest of our code works. This is not always possible. Sometimes the best you can do is show an error message to the user. For example, if a server is offline and you can't save data on a server, there's little else you can do. You can just tell the user about that and tell him to not leave the page and try again later. In other cases like this, you might be able to use a fallback value and fall back without the user even noticing. You could, of course, also tell the user that you entered something wrong. Default value of 100 was used, so that you fall back, but you let the user know about that. That's totally up to you. So now with that, if we save that and we reload, now if I enter hi there, I get that you entered something wrong. I get that console log, which, please note, now is not an error anymore. We don't have that red background, so this is not a system error anymore. Instead, it's just a normal log message. And our app works just as before with that value of 100 being used. So that now all works, and we can play with this game just as before, but now with our own error handling logic. In this case, with a graceful fallback. In other cases, showing an error message might be the best you can do. Now, just to make this really clear again, of course, the logic we had before, where we had just this if check and then also assigned a default value of 100, wasn't bad. I wanted to show you try catch, which here isn't bad, and in other cases is absolutely necessary, because in other cases you get an error if you want it or not, and you need to be able to handle it. That's why it's a good time to already practice with it here, even though in this exact case, since parseInt doesn't throw an error, you could have absolutely kept the old logic and avoided this try catch block. Now, I'm not entirely done with try catch. You can also add another element to try catch, and that's finally. Now, you add finally like this. You add the finally keyword after try or after try catch. You don't need to have catch. You can just have finally here. You need to have try though. Try catch without try doesn't exist. But you can also have try catch finally. And the idea is that the code inside of finally will now always execute no matter if you had an error or not. Now you might wonder what the idea behind that is, because the code after try catch, so all the other code, also executes here, no matter if we had an error or not. So why would this be helpful? Well, you can use finally to do any cleanup work if you, for example, have a case where another error happens inside your try catch block. And be that only because you maybe throw the error again. That's also something you will sometimes do the more advanced you become. This is called rethrowing an error, and we might do some error handling here, typically not some fallback as we're doing it here though, but we might just be sending that error to our own analytics server, for example, so that we are notified of that error we had in our application. Maybe we can't fall back as we can here, but maybe we can just show the user an error message, and we also want to log the error to our own analytics servers. So we might be sending that request to our own servers here, and then we rethrow that error. We rethrow that error here so that in some other part of our code, we can then handle it and show that error message to the user. Again, that's a little hard to imagine here. I'm aware of that because this is some basic project, some basic program, but you could have multiple try-catch blocks in different places of your app. And here you only have the first one, which sends it to your own servers, and then you throw that error again. Now, in that case, still maybe you want to do some cleanup work here. Maybe release some data which you saved, maybe clear some variables. Do something like this, and then you could do that in finally. Now, I will be honest, in a lot of scenarios, you will not need finally, especially in this example, you definitely don't need it because we can perfectly fall back. So the code after this will execute. There's no reason to rethrow the error. If you would rethrow, the code thereafter doesn't execute and only finally will. That's the difference then. That's the advantage of finally. It executes even if you do throw an error here. The other code will not because your script will crash if you then don't handle it somewhere else. But here we don't really need that because we have a perfect fallback. It's good to know that finally is there though in cases where you will have an error in catch, you rethrow or you get another error, and therefore you know the rest of your script will not be able to continue. Well, then finally can be used for some cleanup work, and that can be helpful at times. Now, just as with the other constructs shown here, we'll also see try-catch in action again later in the course, and especially when we work with network requests, it will make more sense because then we really need it. Then there are things we can't do without it. But since it is a control structure, now is the time to introduce it. Keep it in mind, keep its general functionality in mind, that you try code and then you can react upon an error and fall back or show an error message, and you'll get more and more practice with it throughout this course.